Hey, okay, we're going to start chapter 9 now, The Worlds of Islam, Afro-Eurasian Connections, 600 to 1500. This chapter is vital to world history, very important to the AP World History course, and I hope that you learn a lot in this chapter. This is a great opportunity. The rise of Islam is one of the most significant turning points for AP World History, and this particular chapter describes the global transformations that accompanied Islamic expansion in the 7th century. And this chapter focuses strongly on religion and culture, but it also touches on other political, economic, and social history themes. It describes the different ways that Islam expanded from the Arabian Peninsula to the various parts of Afro-Eurasia. And I want you to think about describing how Islam expanded through military conquest, missionary activities, trade. And this book emphasizes that the spread of Islam was not as instantaneous as what the map in the book seems to suggest. But it's important to realize that even though Islam spread to large parts of a particular area, it seems like at the same time, it may have taken a particular region centuries for the bulk of the population to follow the Islamic faith, especially the political and economic elite. So keep that in mind. Okay, so let's describe this picture. Let's talk about what it shows. This painting, it almost looks like it's from a page in a book. It shows a group of 9 men and 5 camels and a horse, all on the move. And see, the men are wearing turbans and very colorful clothes. Most are bearded, and the 6 men riding the camels look to be holding maybe musical instruments, horns, drums, and 3 long poles with 2 or 4 long and narrow flags, are reaching out of this rather densely packed group. The camel in front seems to carry a richly decorated vessel or some type of a cabin. And 2 men are walking among the camels, and 1 man is riding a horse. You can see in the front of the picture. So let's think about explaining the meaning of this image. This image shows a scene from the Hajj. That's the pilgrimage to Mecca. The central religious ritual in Islam. The Hajj was a festive event that brought many Muslims together from different parts of the world. And it's the crowded and joyous appearance of this group of pilgrims illustrates not just the religious importance of the Hajj, but its social significance as an occasion for festivities and camaraderie and fellowship. All right, the birth of a new religion. So, by the start of the 21st century, Islam had acquired a significant presence in the United States. More than 1,200 mosques, about 8 million Muslims. And the second half of the 20th century saw the growing international influence of Islam. Now, Islam had already been prominent in the world between 600 and 1600, encompassed parts of Africa, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. And it's enormously significant in world history. This is the creation of a new and innovative civilization. It was the largest and most influential of the third wave civilizations. And Islam's reach generated major cultural encounters. And probably by the year 2000, there were perhaps 1.2 billion Muslims in the world. This is right here. That's a little approximate symbol that you use in math. So it means about, approximately. And that's about 22% of the world's population. Now, unlike, starting with the homeland of Islam. Now, unlike most religious or cultural traditions, Islam emerged from a marginal region. The Arabian Peninsula is home of nomadic Arabs called Bedouins. They were fiercely independent clans and tribes. They had a variety of gods that they believed in and worshipped. And Arabia also had a sedentary agricultural areas. The tribal feuds and trading centers of the Arabian Peninsula. Now, prior to the Islamic revelations, the Arab world was characterized by the tribal organization of these Bedouin groups. They fought a series of bitter feuds amongst themselves, clashing over access to trade centers and oases. And as the peninsula was home to some of the trade routes between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, this region saw a lot of economic growth thanks to the increase in long-distance trade. Now, Arabia is on an important east-west trade route, or several trade routes, and Mecca became important as a trade center. It's home of the Kaaba and the Quraysh. I'm pretty sure I mispronounced that. But one of the cities, Mecca, while somewhat removed from the trade routes, it served as an important pilgrimage, as the Kaaba, which is a shrine, housed idols of hundreds of tribal gods from the region. And the Quraysh dominated the city and grew wealthy from taxing the pilgrims that came to worship at the Kaaba. And it was the most prominent religious shrine. And so they controlled the local trade in the pilgrimage. Arabia was on the edge of the Byzantine and Sassanid empires, so Arabs knew some practices of both of these empires. Judaism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism had spread amongst the Arabs, and so they were also familiar with other religions as well. And so there was a lot of contact with the Byzantine and Sassanid empires. The peninsula was adjacent to both. Both empires were powerful. There was knowledge of the wider world because of their interaction with those two. And a variety of people from the Christian and Persian worlds lived in the cities of the Arabian Peninsula. Now, while the Arab tribes were polytheistic, there was contact, like I said, with Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians, all living amongst them, and began to spread the idea of monotheism. And some Arabs came to view the god Allah as the preeminent God of the pantheon, and some linked Allah to the Jewish god Yahweh, exploring the idea that Allah was the one true God and the rest of the gods were merely idols. And these Arabs came to see themselves as, just like the Jews, descendants of Abraham. And so at about 600, it seemed as if the Arabs were moving towards Judaism or Christianity. And this is an excellent map that gives you an idea. You see in orange the Byzantine Empire. We got the Sassanid Persian Empire. And so they had interaction with both. And you can see trade from the Mediterranean out to the Indian Ocean had to go through the Arabian Peninsula, or at least its borders here. And we see the important city of Mecca. But it's a great map. Shows you where everything is, and then of course you can get a good idea of where we are here. So over here you see India, and of course this is Africa, and up here is Europe. Okay, the messenger and the message. The prophet of Islam was Muhammad ibn Abdullah, lived 570 to 632. He was orphaned at a young age, became a prosperous merchant thanks to marriage to Khadijah. And shortly thereafter, he took to withdrawal and meditation. And beginning of some revelations from Allah were in 610. And these revelations were recorded in the Quran. And when heard in its original Arabic, it was believed to convey the presence of the divine. So that's how important it is. Muhammad, historical figure. He was orphaned. He was raised by an uncle. And actually, as a boy, he was a shepherd and became a merchant when he was a young man. And the woman that he married, she was a wealthy merchant, a widow. And they had 6 children, I believe. Both were deeply spiritual, but he became greatly troubled by the social injustices in Mecca. And that's why he frequently retreated to the hills and withdrew and began to meditate. And so those revelations essentially became the Quran. He had a series of revelations that lasted over 2 decades. And he believed that he was the messenger of God, and according to him, he reluctantly accepted that he was the messenger of God, and he recited these revelations, and it was recorded as the Quran, and that's a sacred text of Islam, just like Christians have the Bible, and Jews have the Torah, Muslims have the Quran. And they're believed to be the direct word of God. Extremely beautiful verses in the original Arabic. And this was rather a revolutionary new idea. These are radical new teachings. It's monotheistic as opposed to the polytheistic Arabian tribes. And Muhammad essentially was seen as the seal of the prophets. This return to an old pure religion of Abraham. And the central tenet was the submission to Allah. And Muslim means one who submits. And then became this need to create a new society of social justice and equality and care for others. And that new society was called the Umma. In one sense, the revelations were a revolution against polytheism and idol worship. And this returned to the religion of Abraham. In another sense, the revelations were actually called to return to the pure faith of Abraham. And so there was this call to purge the faith of corruption and errors, and that's this new society of social justice and equality that comes out. And they thus begin to believe that Jews wrongly saw themselves as the chosen people, Christians had wrongly turned their prophet into a god, and Arabs had fallen into idol worship and polytheism. And so the message was a universal call for all to engage in a pure faith. And the core message is summarized in the 5 pillars of Islam. The first pillar is a simple profession: there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. They pray 5 times a day at certain times. There's generous giving to the community and the needy, so alms is very important. Fasting during the month of Ramadan, and the pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, and that's what we saw in that first painting. Now, jihad which means struggle, is sometimes called the sixth pillar. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard the word jihad in the news, and because of the chaos and the conflict that seems to be ongoing in the Middle East, because many refer to as that conflict as a jihad or a holy war in that sense. But it's the word is beginning to be, it's taken out of context a lot of times. There are two kinds of jihads: a greater jihad, which is a personal spiritual striving, the struggle within oneself. And then there's the lesser jihad, and that's the jihad of the sword. And this is actually armed struggle against unbelief and evil. And then there's the understanding of the concept has varied widely over time, and that's what I was talking about. How jihad is understood is just very different from what it used to be. And here we have another picture, or painting, I should say. And this painting shows a group of men in turbans and robes, and it looks like they're in prayer. They're sitting on a rug. In the center is a man whose head seems almost like it's engulfed in flames. And to his right sit three white-robed men, varying ages. And the man closest to the center has a white beard and wears a black robe, and he seems to be the oldest. The man next to him sports a red robe and a black beard. And the one on the outer edge to the right wears a blonde red beard and a blue robe. And across from these three sit three men in red robes and turbans. And notice these three are all the same. And even though these three have the white turbans, they're wearing different color robes, and they have different color facial hair and skin. So who do you think these men are supposed to be? Well, the figure in the center is supposed to be the Prophet Muhammad, and it's the idea of a fiery preaching that's illustrated with the flames around his head. And to his right sit Moses, Abraham, and Jesus. Muhammad is leading the three representatives of Judaism and Christianity in prayer to fellow Muslims on the left. And so this, if you think about it, this is a rather powerful and profound picture, because they're taking the three main monotheistic faiths and bringing them together in a religious way, in a calm way, no conflict. And so what do you think the message in this painting is trying to convey? Well, Islam, Judaism, Christianity are all monotheistic religions, all centered in the Middle East. And from the perspective of the artist, which actually is from Persia, the Prophet Muhammad built on the revelations of the Jews and the Christians, heavily influenced by those. And so I wanted to include this painting because it's so important. You could see, we've got three right here with Muhammad. And, that's incredible. Moses, Abraham, and Jesus Christ, all sitting with Muslims. All right, the transformation of Arabia. Muhammad attracted a small following, and this aroused some opposition from the Meccan elites. In 622, they emigrated to Yathrib, or Medina, and they created the Islamic community, the Umma, in Medina. Remember, that's the community that's looking for social equality and justice. And they eventually broke definitively from Judaism. There are too many fundamental disagreements. Now there was this community of believers that formed around Muhammad, and his revelations angered the elite in Mecca. He was even accused of betraying his tribe, and so they were forced out of Mecca, and that's why they immigrated to Yathrib, or what became known as Medina, the city of the prophet. And the departure from Mecca and the founding of the Umma in Medina is known as the Hijra. And it marks the starting year of the Islamic calendar, and that's its significance. And so, building this Umma in Medina, in the new city, Muhammad revealed new laws to create a more just and peaceful society. Importantly, membership was not based on family lineage, but upon acceptance of the faith. And in Medina, the Muslims began to pray towards Mecca. And so that's where the second pillar, pray 5 times a day at a certain time, they all face, no matter where they are in the world, they all face Mecca to pray. And so that's where that comes from. And thus began a rapid expansion throughout Arabia. Military successes led to alliances, even large-scale conversion, and a consolidation of Islamic control throughout Arabia. It happened by the time of Muhammad's death in 632. Despite the conflict with its neighbors, the Umma, despite the conflict with its neighbors, one Jewish group allied against the Umma. That's when they made the clear break between Islam and Judaism. And importantly, this was a conflict with one specific tribe in the context of a war. And he didn't condemn all Jews. And Muhammad won a series of wars and encouraged marriage alliances. And he finally went back to Mecca and purged the Kaaba of the tribal idols. And most of the peninsula was unified then under an Islamic state by the time of his death. And he basically united a chaotic peninsula under his leadership. And so we begin to see a fusion between religious and political authority. Despite the fundamental differences between the births of Islam and Christianity, two very different, what's the word I'm looking for? Aspects as to how these two religions arose. Very important. Islam didn't grow as a persecuted minority religion, right? When Christianity began, many Christians were persecuted. They were the minority group in the Roman Empire. This didn't happen with the Muslims. In Islam, there is no separation of church and state. That's the fusion of political and religious authority. And that's not like other world religions. Muhammad fused the spiritual and political authority, and there was no church outside the state, and thus no church or state conflict like they've had in Europe. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought there was one more, and that seems to be the end.